Let's do it. Hey, functional friends, Bren Vermeyer here. Welcome to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about all things related to functional health, including functional medicine, functional fitness, functional spirituality, functional psychology, and basically everything in between. And of course, you can't spell functional without fun, so we like to have a good time on this show. Now, before we get started with introducing today's honored guest, I want to remind you all that the content of this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not at all intended to be a replacement for supervised healthcare. So be sure that you're working proactively with your licensed healthcare provider to make sure that all of your healthcare and medical needs are being met effectively. Of course, if you're interested in our functional services at Metabolic Solutions, you can send us an email at info@metabolicsolutions.llc.com, and of course, visit our website, metabolicsolutions.llc.com. Also, if you love this podcast, I would really appreciate it if you share it with your family and friends. Like it, follow us, subscribe, review. It really means the world because ultimately, I believe that the greatest medicine of all is to teach people how not to need it. And the first step towards change is awareness and then education and empowerment. So that is what my platform is dedicated to. That's what this podcast is dedicated to, is helping educate and empower self-healers around the world so that they can overcome their greatest health objectives. So be sure to subscribe and leave us a positive review, and don't forget to share with your loved ones. So without further ado, let's get started with today's guest. Thank you so much for being here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and functional friends alike, you are in for a very, very special treat this month, as I'd like to introduce our very special and honored guest for this month as we wrap up season 2 of the Holistic Savage podcast. So allow me to introduce my dear friend, Dr. Nicole Lepera. So certainly that name should sound familiar, as she is known as the Holistic Psychologist on Instagram. And I really couldn't be more excited and honored to not only be able to say that she's been an amazing client to work with, but also has become a very dear friend and somebody that I look up to a lot, somebody that inspires me every single day to continue to cultivate my truth and share it with the world fearlessly. So Dr. Nicole Lepera was trained in clinical psychology at Cornell University and the New School for Social Research. She also studied at the Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis. As a clinical psychologist in private practice, Dr. Nicole Lepera often found herself frustrated by the limitations of traditional psychotherapy. Wanting more for her patients and for herself, she began a journey to develop a united philosophy of mental, physical, and spiritual health that equips people with the tools necessary to heal themselves. Nothing short of a paradigm shift, Dr. Nicole Lepera's teachings empower the individual to break free from trauma cycles and create who they want to become. So, if you have been listening to the Holistic Savage podcast for some time, we wrapped up season 1, episode 12 with Dr. Nicole, and it was by far our most popular episode. And that single episode got more downloads and plays than the entire season combined, which really says something because all of the guests on the Holistic Savage podcast are all experts and leaders in their unique niches and spaces. So I literally couldn't be more excited to bring Dr. Nicole Lepera back onto the Holistic Savage podcast for round 2 as we wrap up season 2, as we talk about her new book, How to Do the Work. So be sure to review this episode, share it with your family and friends, and don't forget to pre-order your copy of How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole Lepera. So without further ado, welcome to the Holistic Savage podcast. All right, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Holistic Savage podcast. I don't need to make any crazy formal. I don't like to be formal or stiff. We have my good friend, Dr. Nicole Lepera, the queen of the self-healer movements, the Holistic Psychologist. Nicole, welcome. Welcome back to the podcast. I couldn't be happier to have you with me today.
I couldn't be more excited to be here with you today, Brendan, myself.
Wonderful. So, man, where do we even begin? I'm going to I always like saying the stage with almost like the preface of who this person is to me and whatnot. So, first off, I have to say your first episode on the Holistic Savage podcast, I've been, more fortunate than I deserve in a sense of having just a straight legendary lineup of amazing professionals on my show. And yet your episode got more downloads and listens than the rest of the episodes combined for season 1, which was just amazing and mind-blowing. And so I couldn't be more excited to have you back on season 2, which has been another legendary season. And we first connected back in like 2018, and I remember when we first connected, you were sitting at like 60,000 followers on Instagram, which is obviously a very impressive platform, and the work was amazing. And I remember the thing that really got me was, the holistic psychology, but then also you had like a gut health guide. I'm like, oh, she and I are going to be best friends. But then since then, you have been on just an amazing journey. And, you currently just hit 3 million followers on Instagram, kind of the primary platform. And so I'd love to kind of start the conversation by hearing from you, like, what kind of ride has this been for you as you have started making such a huge impact on the world?
It's been a ride, that is safe to say. And, Brendan, when I hear you say things like the number of downloads and obviously the astronomical growth of the platform, I mean, even the number 60,000 is, mind blowing to me, let alone, the 3+ million that we're now having. And I smile, though I smile more, kind of thinking about what that to me means, those numbers, this growth, etc., simply means to me how universally resonant this is. Whether we're talking about all of the ways many of us are stuck in healing and unable to create the change that we want, to obviously the roads that begin to clear as we begin to then engage on our healing journeys. Hearing these numbers, I smile because, like I said, it's just universal. We're all, kind of collectively joined in this very real way. So I say all that to say that my experience of it has been quite a ride. I think I'm not remembering exactly if this came up when you and I spoke at what one might say were the more beginnings of my journey online. And if we hadn't, when you hear me speak of that, you often hear me talk about the personal challenges in my own healing journey that even being visible online was. As a human, being someone historically who filtered my truth, this is how I'm going to word this, through the effect that my truth would have on others, which usually ended up with a distilled version of my truth coming out of my mouth, being the way I was in the world, etc. Meaning I did so much for others, worrying about them, what they would think of me. I mean, really, really, the list goes on. So deciding to come online and putting a truth out there for me as a personal human on the personal side of things, before we talk about practitioner side of things, that was challenging for me. I hadn't done that. So inherently, implicitly, I share that because that is part of my always journey online. There's a very real inner child part of myself that when I see those numbers, when I hit live, to be seen in this way, be a podcast or an Instagram live, there's that inner child part of me that wants to run away, and hide. So that's a constant conversation. Same thing when I think about my practitioner hat. There's still a very, scared self inside of me of how am I going to appear as a professional speaking these new truths. So when I share that it's been a ride, it's because a lot of my journey online has embodied a lot of my own healing as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's kind of always the case of anybody that gets into holistic health and whatnot. It's always that we learn a lot of our greatest lessons through, navigating, transcending our own struggles. And that's where, I feel like I have so much to learn from you, and so many future conversations to be had, because I even know from my own professional journey, like, it's terrifying. And then I'm starting to, put more authentic truth out there. You start getting that pushback, and that doesn't feel good. And, people try and tear you down just as much as building you up. So, I mean, I can only really imagine, what that's been like, as you were already speaking your truth in a way that was resonating with so many. And I'm kind of curious, like, obviously the challenges that have probably come up along the way, I mean, it kind of just adds fuel to the fire and inspiration, and maybe challenges you to then reveal like yet another layer as you unlearn those habits and behaviors. So, it's almost kind of paradoxical with you, because in a way it's like, I know you wouldn't say it, but to all of us, your fans, we would think like, oh, she has it all figured out. Like, she never has self-doubt. She never lets other people cause her to deviate from her truth and her authenticity. But I'd be curious to hear, from your perspective, like, the criticism. And I've seen you write about how, other psychologists and how they kind of come at you. So if you want to kind of speak to that, of how, I'm sure it hasn't just been, rainbows and butterflies the whole time.
Absolutely not. There's been a lot of challenge in staying in alignment and expressing the truth. And as I begin to think more and more about it, I want to differentiate two aspects, I think, of the conversation that I'll continue to talk about to explain. There's, and I'm just kind of thinking this in the moment, free associate, but there's truth, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the communication, the
Mhm.
wording, the delivery of truth. So I want to separate those out because I think they kind of function, and then there's the interaction between the two of them. So in terms of speaking one's truth, I put my message out there. Part of my goal, and you'll always hear me quote saying this, is to empower humans as individuals to find their own truths, to hear multiple, maybe narratives. That's the word I often use, other people's stories, their conceptualizations, how they think about what happened to them or how they heal, right? And to find the parts that resonate, to develop the confidence. I call it a home base. So to maybe be able to hear multiple messages, other people's experiences, maybe even peppered in with beliefs, right? Hear them, and then go back somewhere to my own sanctum of safeties. For a lot of us, that's inner, and then try them on for size, knowing that ultimately I am the decider of whether or not that truth resonates with my end as I conceptualize and, for a lot of us, kind of shape my way to figuring out our truth. Because a lot of us in the beginning of the journey don't know, right? So that process of hearing, being open, being receptive, all the while likely we're having reactions to what maybe we're hearing from the world, other people's stories, going on again, trying it on for size and empowering us each to do that. I think that's such an incredibly important part of healing and of understanding ourselves. And I believe that that does come from within us, within each of us. No one person's truth, kind of can be applied to ours. And I think that's the biggest journey, of empowerment, is learning how to tolerate the moments where we don't hear those things that are in alignment, or where we hear what we hear challenges ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's kind of separating out and creating that space. So yes, there's been a lot of times when, sharing aspects of my journey, learning how myself to be receptive, to understand how that truth is resonating in the world, going back, maybe hearing everyone's opinions of my beliefs, the way I work, the way I, imagine and conceptualize my journey, and then having my inner sanctum to understand what fits and what doesn't, and then continue to present my truth to the world. That I want to differentiate between communication of it. Something I'm always, because yes, to speak to your question in there that I kind of am shifting, we allow messages in because sometimes what we hear outside of ourselves can be more objective, can be that valuable piece of us, that perspective that, sometimes we'll maybe get from partners or loved ones, that it might be an uncomfortable perspective, though we can use it to shape or to see ourselves from a different, more helpful vantage point, right? That I want to differentiate between how am I communicating my truth. because something so I'm working myself to be receptive, to let in opinions, to try them on for size, and to continue to hone my confidence in my own differentiating. This applies to me, this doesn't, this right. However, that is different from how do I communicate my truth. And something that I'm always trying to hone as a skill is communication, to understand the language to use, understanding that social media has its limitations. It's also an incredibly valuable tool. How can I communicate my truth in a way that can be heard by the biggest, kind of span of the collective? So just two different processes, both of which I'm always considering when I hear feedback. The one is more internal, right? Everyone's opinions of me and my work. How can I use that for information? Is that giving me a vantage point of myself that might be uncomfortable but helpful? Separate from criticisms about how I'm communicating my truth. Can I learn from that? Can I incorporate it? Can I learn how to communicate in a way that can be received differently? Two dynamic processes of evolution and of finding, I think, our way forward.
That was a beautiful answer. And the differentiation, I think, is extremely valuable. And like I followed that 100% because I definitely have experienced, we can get feedback that, yeah, it can be triggering. And, it's where always that patience, that tolerance, that reframe. And it's good, right? Like we need other perspectives because it's either going to kind of further, solidify, justify, validate, kind of confirm, like, no, this belief that I choose to have and choose to believe, like, that really means a lot to me. And sometimes maybe those prickly interactions just further solidify that. But also too, I like how you're saying how, and that's kind of what I was wondering, is how the experience has almost like helped further define and kind of perfect, and like, you're whittling down, because for following you for as long as I have, I've seen, the core essence of your material has felt the same, but yeah, the delivery and it feels honed, it feels crafted, and it's been beautiful to watch you as you're kind of crafting your art for the world to now enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And hearing that it's noticeable, and that's part of our journey of crafting our art, of our humanity. I mean, I could go as far to say that. I mean, that's what life is about, right? Learning the self, connecting with the self, and then shaping what I believe is the self's creation in the world, whether or not that's the content that you see me putting out, that's a little more concrete and palpable. I'm of the belief that we're a walking self-expression. And one might say that what you very beautifully kind of eloquent, it was the journey of life. It's about honing and kind of coming more and more into the essence and being the living creation, which I think happens in this more kind of shaped way. So likely, as you and I continue to build our, professional and personal friendship and have these conversations, you might be here, you and I probably both are going to be speaking a bit differently 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we're maybe talking about the same essence. Though, again, you and I are going to continue to hone and to craft as humans and obviously as practitioners.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Yeah. And, I think a while back I had posted on my own platform of, something about, like, you can't just, like, speaking your truth isn't enough, you have to live it, right? And I think that's, like, you embody that so much, you really are living. And then, like you said, that's where that differentiation is really helpful, of like how you communicate it, how you live it. And so this is kind of a funny story. I had somebody reach out to me. They wanted to interview you, and they were able to get a hold of me. So they interviewed me kind of about your work and my perspective on it. And it wasn't just me. I was impressed by, they interviewed doctors and PhDs and all sorts of different professionals, kind of get different perspectives. I don't know that I ever saw the article, but it was about, the self-healer movement, which, way back when, Hippocrates once upon a time said, if you're not your own doctor, you're a fool, which, pretty blunt, but hey, I mean, Hippocrates knew a thing or two, way ahead of his time. And so I definitely think, uh, what's interesting to me, I feel that humans have always been self-healers. Voltaire said the art of medicine is entertaining the patient while nature does the healing, right? So we've always been self-healers, But especially in the past 100 years, we've forgotten that, right? And I'm not at all saying anything bad about big pharma, but obviously, with the rise of big pharma and our current healthcare system, we lost our power. We kind of surrendered it over time, almost like the frog in the boiling water. You don't know you're cooking and whatnot. And then you have really breathed life into this self-healer movement, unlike anything before. And so some of the interview questions that I was asked by the interviewer, and I'm sure she got other perspectives from other people, but what she asked me, and I would like to then kind of pose to you, she asked me, Brennan, so how would you explain, why would somebody be against the self-healer movement? Because there are those that, oh no, and all of that. So I'd like to hear you speak to that a little bit of your stance on, how you look at this movement that you've really established yourself as the leader of, and to those that are kind of against this idea of empowerment and self-healing.
So I think I want to clarify what I mean when I mean self-healing, because I think some of the hesitancy or even outright criticism is possibly based on an alternate definition. Self-healing doesn't mean an absence of external support. Self-healing is, again, empowering the individual, just like I spoke to you that I work to do with myself, to find the avenues of support that are of most resonance and obviously also of most access, acknowledging that we have a big glaring privilege issue in many of the medical systems, mental wellness included, right? So empowering the individual to find their path toward their own healing. So just to clarify, that's what self-healing means to me. It doesn't mean an absence of other professionals. I mean, I will even share with the listeners here, you are my new happy, healthy, functional medicine practitioner. I seek extra support, right? I have people that help me that are more an expert in the area of the body, such as yourself, Brendan, to help me develop the tools so I can care for my body day in and day out in the way that makes me feel the best. I was also this past year in rebuilding some relationships with my family in family therapy, because at the time and in the context, that was supportive to me and my family. So just to clarify, self-healing does not mean an absence of other people's support. Sometimes I believe one aspect of criticism is people hearing me to mean otherwise, that I'm saying heal on an island. And very, very, astutely, a lot of the contenders of when they believe me to be saying otherwise are bringing up the reality. We are interpersonal creatures as human. We cannot heal alone. I wholeheartedly agree, which is why I have developed not only the Instagram community, the free community of self-healers that anyone can access, of course, as long as you have a phone and access to Instagram and social media. Again, not all of us have that, right? So giving the tools for the people who have that, who have access to that, as well as in the virtual community, because we need people. We need those community supports. With that said, I also know, because this is a big part of the work that I talk about every day, I'm going to throw out a very universal statement here. Change is hard. Change is hard for any of us. And a lot of us, that have come through the system, either as the patient, client, and or the practitioner, whether you're in the medical, wearing the medical doctor hat, or like me, the mental wellness hat, we've come through systems where we have beliefs, and believing things, I think, that are one way, and having those beliefs gradually be deconstructed. Because a lot of us practitioners, when we come into our own practices, when we start to see how ineffectual some of this is, we are calling our beliefs into question. And for me, while I don't talk about this aspect of it often, mainly just because it doesn't come up so much in conversation, shifting from that old mindset, right, where I believed, for instance, mental illness or wellness to be determined solely by our genetics, where I believed our options to treat were talk therapy, some emotional supportive tools, and or medication. I believed I was going to be that therapist, helping individuals in that way for as long as I knew that I would be working. So deconstructing that and rebuilding beliefs of difference, of change, possibility, of epigenetics was incredibly personally difficult. So I can resonate with the different stages of evolution when paradigms shift, right? When people who once were trained in one way of, symptom management, more or less, now being challenged to, entertain even first the possibility of change, let alone embody the practice of change, that's destabilizing. So one of the ways I understand, and because I can relate and resonate, and I've had a lot of friends in the field of mental wellness similarly shifting their practices to be a bit more integrative, that all say the same thing. It was like a loss of self. I lost a part of my identity. I became maybe just practically fearful of how I would continue to make my income, support my family. I mean, the list goes on. So, the simple answer, shifting the paradigm, deconstructing these very core beliefs that a lot of us were operated and trained to operate in, is incredibly challenging, just like any type of change is. And I think can elicit a lot of different reactions.
That was a really, really great answer. And as you're saying, it's so crucial to, right? I mean, assumptions. Oh my gosh, like that's what, the second agreement or something like that from um
Hmm. Before agreement.
that book. Yeah, beautiful book. Because yeah, assumptions, people, it's that warrior mindset as opposed to scout mindset. You hear something that threatens your chosen belief system, that's connected to our sense of identity, it feels like a threat, you pounce on it and whatnot. And what I think is so interesting about, I don't know, the the age that we live in, and I think our technology is a huge factor in that. It feels like, and I don't know, maybe every other generation kind of felt existential crisis. I think that's just part of the human experience. But it definitely feels like we are living in kind of a heightened time where, and I won't blabber about it too much because I see this, everything we've done for the past 30, 50, 100 years, it's kind of leading us to this point. We're hitting this crossroads of, we're the only species on earth that's living dysbiotically with the natural world. I was on a podcast recently, and she was asking, like, why do you think we're in this great crisis? I'm like, we're the only species that is dysbiotic. It's
Yeah.
not anything crazy. And so I keep talking about, it's like we have to relearn how to live symbiotically with ourselves, with one another, with the natural world. And so I kind of keep saying this, return to symbiosis. And to me, the only clear way that I see of how we are going to return to symbiosis is this paradigm shift. I don't see it happening without.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for a lot of us, it means a return to something you beautifully brought up earlier, right? Which is that essence, right? That individual, that wholeness, that kind of before all of the conditioning and all of the disconnect from our really interconnected core self. That's, I believe, what is at each of our core, that soul, that indescribable entity that I also think is mirroring this kind of universal waking up. We're all, some more comfortably than others, coming to the awareness that, this kind of like sack of skin and this like mind aren't it. Like there, like that there is like another piece, existential, right? Call it that. I believe the first existential crisis we all face is going from that togetherness, right? To that, oh, I'm an individual little separate infant and here's all separateness around me. At our core, we're integrated. And I love that dysbiosis because I think it's not only integrated within me as that whole being of physical, emotional, and spiritual self, it's then being interconnected with other humans and with our environment. And I couldn't agree with you more that we've not moved more into connection. We've actually moved more out of connection. However, the movement, I believe, the awakening that's happening is the realization and now the restructuring of how do we find our way back into
Mhm.
integration.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I will admit, early in 2020, I was really wrestling with some existential dread of there for a while. I was like, I am not seeing a whole lot of hope for the trajectory of our species and collective. And but even just like recently, some of these documentaries like Fantastic Fungi comes to mind, or Kiss the Ground that was released recently, and The Social Dilemma. We're seeing this awakening. We're seeing, as person by person, as it spreads, people are waking up of, we're not like, I just gave the lecture of my life on Sunday all about mental health from a functional perspective. And so I went all into this stuff. But yeah, I mean, you look at the statistics, whether it's chronic disease or depression or suicide being a top leading cause of death for Americans, like clearly there's something deep within like the fabric of our souls and culture and society that is dysfunctional. And one of my friends, I hope you get to meet him someday. His name's Dr. Adam Miller. He was on the podcast. He kind of talks similarly, but rather than saying self-healer, his thing is the citizen scientist, right? And I think we are in this
I love citizen science.
Yeah, right. Isn't it great? And he's oh my gosh, freakishly impressive human. Like this guy, I'm just like, oh man. Because he's a medical doctor and this and this and this and all these things. But I got to talk to him in Arizona last year, hanging out, and he talked a lot about that citizen scientist. He's like, well, Brendan, the healthcare system is not as broken as everybody wants to make it out to be. Like, we're not idiots. Like, we're keeping a close eye on all the data. We're doing the research. But what we need is the people to take their power back. We need people to do their own homework. We need the citizen scientists. And, hearing that come from, a medical doctor, I was like, oh, good. Like there is hope.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think, initially, citizen science, whoa, right? We need the book, and I'm not again saying that there aren't protocols in place to keep science and measurable and operationalizable and all of the other ables, generalizable, right? I understand. I also don't think though that is putting down, right, like disempowering the human at the service of these systems, right? It's both. It's how can we empower all of it.
Absolutely. Have you read the Celestine Prophecy?
I haven't. I've it's crossed my path in terms of title and book, but I haven't read it.
I figured you probably it's at least popped up on your radar. I'm trying to chip away at it, but here I am like a year later, so I guess I'm not doing a good job. But I've read enough of it. So there was a point in the book that I really liked, and I think you'll appreciate this, where there's this manuscript in the book that everybody's trying to get their hands on, and this manuscript is the prophecy kind of on a scroll sort of thing. And one of the things that it was revealing is how it's like we think back to medieval times, and the church ruled with an iron fist, right? Like your purpose in this life, in this reality, in this world is to do what we tell you to, and if you do it right, you go to heaven. If you don't do it right, you go to hell, right? I mean, that wasn't that long ago, what, hundreds or however long ago medieval times was. And so then kind of began the scientific pursuit, where people started kind of wising up of like, something doesn't feel right here. This kind of feels unfair. This feels a little dictatory. So enter the scientific pursuit of, well, if we're not here because of what the church has always told us, so that's the truth. And if that's not really the truth, because that doesn't feel right, why are we here? And enter the scientific pursuit of trying to study the world around us objectively, make sense of it, figure out why we're here. But the point that the book made that I'm trying to make is, it was speaking how, okay, so here we are, fast forward 100,000 years, like whatever it's been. And we have all this amazing technology. We have stem cells, skyscrapers, satellites. It's mind blowing. And so our scientific pursuit, we've figured out how to do all these amazing things. And, we don't have to work as hard, and everything's done for us. And we now live in the matrix, especially in 2020. And yet we still haven't answered the question that began the pursuit, which is, why are we here? And so this book was talking about, kind of that grand awakening that's coming. And it feels like in a lot of ways we're living in that time of awakening right now. And I think you're a huge part of that, right?
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all so much for listening to the Holistic Savage podcast. We on the Holistic Savage team all really appreciate you and want to stay connected with you. So please rate, review, and subscribe to help the podcast grow. And if you like the podcast, help get the word out. And now, back to the show.
Thank you. The thought I'm having, and I'm smiling thinking of it, and it again goes back to something you very beautifully worded earlier, which is we have all of this stuff, the science, the technology, the endless information to find how we're here. Yet, however many decades, eons it's been, and we don't know. That begs to answer the first question again. I'm just free associating, but the first thing that comes to mind is, well, maybe we're looking in the wrong direction. Maybe looking out, again, I'm really simplifying it, isn't where we look at all, right? Maybe we need to begin to look, which is for many of us the scariest place to look, which is within, right? We have all of the stuff to study, all of the things, but maybe the answers aren't there. Maybe that's why we still don't know. And maybe the awakening that's happening now is almost the counter revolution of humans looking within for these answers that have always been there. Like you said, we've always known how to heal. I mean, I'm going to expand this to we just always known. And now we're just so disconnected from that knowing. And we're also distracted by looking, I believe, maybe in the wrong direction.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know who said it, but something about, we're all born twice. First, when we come into the world, the second, when we figure out why, or something like that. Beautiful, powerful. And, that's something, and which for the record, you're like the best client, the easiest to work with. It's, I love it. I could speak to that all day. But my point with that being, from a kind of the functional medicine perspective, and this is something I preach a lot, that I think maybe not having a traditional medical background, I have a little bit of a different perspective in my industry, which is dominated by medical doctors for the most part. And I find in my industry, in my space, there's such a huge emphasis on this, like, oh, well, there's a root cause and let's do all this testing. And what happens though, and I kind of called people out lovingly through social media of, are you chasing your root cause or are you running from your unresolved trauma? Because then what we see is kind of this toxic side effect where a lot of times the functional medicine kind of root cause pursuit sort of enables this sort of spiritual bypassing, as people are like, well, no, like it's not anything has to do with me and my belief system or anything like that. It's, I must have, mold or metals or whatever it is. And it's like, well, if we as functional medicine people are not, holding the space and holding up the mirror and doing that client-centered coaching, we're just totally missing out. And so unresolved trauma being what, maybe the root cause of all root causes, right? And focal point of your work.
I commend you for speaking those really powerful and I know often challenging words. I was actually just on a live with Dr. Carolyn Leaf, and we were talking about the very real, because I think this is where chicken or the egg gets confusing, because a lot of times things will be cited that make the search for this physiological, again, simply for lack of a better word, root cause really appealing. Right? Because there are structural changes in the body. I mean, first and foremost, I've talked to you about a lifetime of inflammation, of constipation, of actual symptoms in my body that you could look and see being the case, right? Making it really hard not to want to look for the physiological cause. And here I am to say that, yes, there are physiological imbalances, but this is chicken or the egg, connected to likely the earliest traumatizing experiences. So what Caroline and I were talking about, she's a neuroscientist, so we talked a lot about the brain, but the structural changes in the brain, I'm going to globalize it to the whole body, the whole system, that can be mapped on, making it really appealing to look for the physiological origin. And I'm here to say we can't be so sure. Those changes likely are probably the accumulated result of the emotional, right, wounds and the adaptations that originated a much longer time ago. So chicken or the egg gets very confusing. A lot of times there are structural changes that we can see, making this desire to find the structural, puzzle piece to fix it, though we can't, I don't believe, extricate. Just like holistically, we're all interconnected. Same thing goes in terms of the origin, trauma playing a role, likely leading to those very real structural imbalances.
Absolutely. And what I love about, I don't know, our dynamic and our relationship is, I always have, mental health is kind of the main thing I focus on. And so I was explaining this on Sunday in my lecture because, with anybody that's experiencing, I prefer to say mental health dysfunction. I'm not really a fan of mental illness. but I always explain it I like to think of it as like a yin yang, right? We've got the yin, the yang, the light, the dark, contrasting duality. Um, but that yin yang of mental health being the physiological and the psychological. And what's awful, and especially with, my history of struggles, like when you're really depressed or really anxious or struggling with your mental health, you have no idea. It's just this complex knot. And it's like, is it physiological? Is it psychological? Probably a little bit of both. Um, and what I found on my own self-healing journey is, I always kind of think like the physiological, assuming that you have a good practitioner, it's almost like the low-hanging fruit, right? Like if we can pinpoint that you're gluten intolerant, you have some mold growing in your tummy or whatever it is, if we can pinpoint that, that's actually a lot easier to deal with. The hardest part is that inner work. But we can't spiritually bypass that and just go perpetually chasing root causes that may not actually be there. So to your point, it's so crucial. And that's where, like, I've always, I send people your way of like, okay, like how to do the work. That's her. You need some testing, I'll do that. But it's so important to distinguish because depression is the leading cause of morbidity and disability worldwide. Suicide top killer of Americans. And I lost somebody very important to me this year to suicide, ironically, right after I turned in my slides to lecture about. So it's so devastating. And that's where, like, we need leaders like you doing the work, which then kind of enters into this whole, I hear you have a book coming out that's how to do the work. So I'll kind of shut up there, but it's so crucial to cause that separation and almost like map out the psychological healing opportunities, physiological, and even though they are, as you said, and even the neuroscience with neuroplasticity really validates that of it, it goes both ways. And so it is that chicken or the egg and that kind of perpetual spinning yin yang.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I appreciate you sending, people my way. I'm going to go as far though, Brendan, to say that the work you do, as far as I conceptualize it, I believe staging happens, healing happens staging. Healing happens in stages or foundations. It's kind of like the Maslowian pyramid, in terms of needing to build foundations at the base before we can put actually like an upside down triangle, the deeper work. And I say all of this to acknowledge that, as far as I see it, the foundational work of two components. The first foundational always work that people probably hate when I say I talk about this concept so much, which is consciousness, learning how to be conscious. That is our first step in a direction of change, because the large majority of the time, upwards of 95% of our day, we're repeating those patterns from our subconscious. So to set ourselves up with the opportunity to create a future that's different, we need to learn how to operate consciously. Right hand in hand with that, in my opinion, is doing that kind of physiological self-assessment. And if you're someone like myself and the many others, innumerable humans who are in a physiologically dysregulated body, I believe at least that foundation is important to put into place before. And when I used to do client work, this is oftentimes the entry point. I would get people that would contact me, hear that I do inner child work or ego work, maybe even know that that's where their wounding is. I want to do that work. And they were met then with my conversation that I'm having with you and everyone now, which is 100%. Let's make sure we have the foundations in place so that we can be really effective when we get there. More often than not, we had to back it up and build those foundations in place. And this is why I say that. And the concept of emotional addiction that I talk about often is a prime example. And I'll use an example from my life. Because my mind and my body are connected, right? They're sending messages back and forth. So even if I conceptually want to do the work in my mind to heal the wounding and all the emotional pieces of things, if the messages that my mind is constantly getting from my body are messages of dysregulation, right? I'm going to really simplify. I can't do that work because so what happens in emotional addiction, I'll use an example. My body is so used to the physiological experience of stress, complete with all of the, hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. Logically, because I knew I was a stressed person, all you would have logically heard me beg for in life is peace. I just want peace. I want my mind to be free from the racing thoughts, and I just want to have a peaceful moment. lo and behold, I would find myself in what could be a peaceful moment. Maybe no one's around me. Maybe they are, but they're being quiet and nothing's going on per se. But because my body is so used to the cortisol and it's rushing around still in my system, not metabolized, my brain's going to wonder, why the stress? Well, there's stress, so let me figure out why. Oh, here's why. And then what can happen, it looks different for each of us, right? I have my racing thoughts, I'm worrying about something, or I'm picking fights in my environment to match my experience, right? So we kind of come, we have, that's why I use that example to illustrate the importance of that physiological balance. We can set ourselves up not to succeed if my body doesn't start to send my mind different messages. If I don't gradually decrease the flow of that cortisol, or gradually teach my body that it's safe to enter my parasympathetic mode of nerve, right? I need to teach my body all of this and allow it to return to that homeostatic balance so that my mind can start to get new signals, and then maybe I can dive into the deeper inner child work. So I go as far to say that the work you're doing in the world is foundationally important to then be able to build upon and do the deeper inner child or psychological work that so many of us are interested in doing. That, of course, I talk a whole lot about the whole top to bottom, beginning to end holistic psychology framework in my new book, How to Do the Work.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. It means the world, and I'm so in love with my industry and everything. And of course, I'm trying to kind of be that next generation of like, cool, this is great. How can we do better?
Yeah.
But this is why, like I'm so in love with our kind of collective space of holistic, integrative, allied healthcare practitioners, because and that's what I love about kind of the functional industry is it is this melting pot of diversity. And diversity is life itself. Like, life is supposed to be diverse. If there's there's not a lot that we really understand about the microbiome, but like, if there's one thing that we do understand, diversity equals better health. And I think, I always like, okay, well, if that's true for this kind of micro environment, it's going to be true for the macro environment. It's going to be true for the psychosomatic environment, right? And so this is where everybody bringing the best. And even like, for example, in kind of like the Lyme mold environmental illness world, which is a huge area of functional medicine, there's actually some really great work being done of like, limbic retraining, and, we have to do the trauma. And so I love seeing as all the melting pot of, kind of the hard science and more just classic medical mixed with, the esoteric mixed with the psychological, psycho-emotional. But I greatly appreciate your point. And I think that's huge, where it's very hard to create and hold the space, to get vulnerable with yourself, to start doing that inner child work, or that trauma work, or ego work, and all the above. It's hard to do that, like, if your brain's on fire from inflammation, or so it does. We have to marry the two. And so with, how to do the work, we'll start getting into your book here, because I couldn't be more excited that you wrote this book. I've already pre-ordered it. Can't wait to get my hands on it. So I'd love to just, kind of open it up, invite you to speak to what this book really means for you, because I've read, and I'd love to hear everything about how special of a project this is for you.
Well, thank you, first and foremost, of course, for your endless support, but of course with the book as well. If you would have asked me, honestly, Brendan, 5 years ago, talk of a book probably wouldn't have come out of my mouth. I wasn't something that I wasn't one of those people that historically, like, I'm going to write a book. It just wasn't neither here nor there. I didn't refute that I could. It just didn't pass my ether as like something I was going to do. So the fact that I'm here now, it's probably been about almost 2 years into the project of, it being proposed, and then thinking about it conceptually. From that moment of it being proposed, while I was very, shocked and honored, I was so grateful, because while you hear me go on and on about the power of the internet and the fact that, to speak to your point, this is probably why we're becoming an integrated medical, for like the macro title system, if you will, is because we can facilitate these conversations now. We have practitioners wearing all different practitioner hats that can come to the common ground of the internet and have conversations. However, they're very limited. They're limited by the platform you use, by the way we can communicate information on that platform. And oftentimes, or all the time, more often than not, it's very incomplete. So for me, I knew that while I saw social media, and I always try to frame it and utilize it as a tool, meaning we can make choices and the tool can be used in all different kinds of ways and contexts into all different outcomes. I knew that it could be used as a tool to connect people and messages, right? And I think that's a large reason why things are becoming more integrated. It's because we are able to connect with other people and to begin to share our story. Though again, like I said, it's limited. So when the book became an opportunity, I knew that this was going to be the place where I can really flesh out, what my theory of holistic healing means. Really taking people through from the macro, the overview, to what this looks like in real time. So everything you've heard us talk about, right? What does it mean to live in consciousness or to live in that autopilot? What's housed back there? I talk all about inner child work and healing and the wounding that many of us experience, and then obviously practical tools to create change. So I would go as far as say, I have a lot of passion projects these days. Again, a decade ago, passion would not have been a word I related to or resonated with. I didn't think I had that chip. I didn't think I was passionate about things because I wasn't, quite honestly. Now I have multiple passion projects, the book being one of them. It's, again, like I said, the contained tomb of holistic healing. I think people can live with books differently than online. It can be, at least I know I love books. I grow with them. I revisit them later. So I'm excited for that aspect of it in terms of what the book will offer. And I'm also excited to continue to build into the virtual community sphere, because that's another aspect of all of this. Because there's two pieces of healing, as far as I see it. The work of it, right? The book, how to do the work, the tools, everything you and I and everyone talks about each and every day. How do I create wellness? And then there's the support, the community. So both of which are both really high up there for me in terms of passion. I want to make sure that the tools are continued to be spoken about so that people can accessibly utilize them in their day-to-day healing and create change. And also, I'm really impassioned about continuing to create virtual community, not only of exchanging ideas like you and I are doing, but of connecting with other humans that are either doing the work of being the practitioner and or doing the work of healing.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Which your community too might have chat about that as well. And so when I saw the cover, first off, super groovy colors. I loved it.
Thank you.
And then the title, How to Do the Work. I was curious because when I first heard you're doing a book, I was like, oh man, of course I was all excited about it. And so when I saw the title, How to Do the Work, I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know what the title was going to be. But I'd love to almost hear you explain, like what does that title mean to you? I know we've kind of mapped it out a bit, but who is this book for? What does that mean? How to do the work, and what can readers expect out of their literary experience?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking. So the work, there's a long lineage. I'm sure listeners have probably, might have heard of other iterations of the work. We talk about the work in terms of the very much needed work in terms of, dismantling systemic racism. There's a lot of work that, as far back as really the ancients go, have been referenced. So I say that to say, I know that there's very individualized meaning. That's really part in the course of the work that I'm putting out there. How do we find our own meaning for the work? So my contribution is, in a long lineage of versions of the work. And again, what it means to me is developing the understanding of the integrated human, the fact that we are physiological, emotional, and spiritual beings. And obviously that understanding then lends for the tools of how to change. So this book, as far as I say it, is for anyone who's human, anyone who wants to, wherever you are in your healing journey. Like I said, this is a book that I'm hoping can live and grow with you, meaning, right, you pick it up at one stage and you kind of read and it sits one way, and maybe you incorporate some tools and you do quote unquote some of the work, and then you could pick it up later. For me, the work and just the concept, because I think when we hear work, do the work, let me put it that way, action, right? That's the first thing I think that comes to mind. And maybe like a stressful action, work. A lot of us assume work is, like a toiling endeavor, if you will. Work for me is highlighting the reality that to create change, we have to begin to do small things differently, or else we're going to get the autopilot. The autopilot is going to run again 95% of the day. So for me, it's kind of breaking down what for a lot of us can be the imagined work of changing our life from top to bottom into much more manageable daily steps. I use the concept of small daily promises. You'll read about that throughout the book. I give some examples of great daily promises to even keep. So this really can get even the most beginner started, but it's acknowledging that there will be small choices that we have to participate in every day. And this is a limit, I believe, of anything that we're doing for a limited amount of time, whether it's the gym that I go to, once a month, every now and again, whether it's a therapist that I even only if I'm privileged enough to be able to see once a week. What about the rest of my hours and the rest of my moments? That's where my question always goes back to, right? And often what's directing my time, my day, my thoughts, my feelings is that autopilot. So the work, again, the concept of working is just acknowledging that we do need to be active participants in making new choices if we want to get something different than our autopilot. And again, we can make them manageable. What most of us do is we overwhelm our system. We try to change too much too quickly. So again, the work in the book itself will really take us through a foundational approach of how to gradually incorporate these new choices. But for me, again, it's highlighting the necessity really of if we want something to happen different, there's going to have to be a different action that's taken at some point.
Awesome. Beautiful. I've done a lot of reflecting on this, and it's kind of coincides with just the neuroplastic model and kind of this brain busting concept of like weights. We can rewire our brains and all of this. Sometimes I think humans, we can be kind of myopic, but it's like I have my plant children over here and I look at them every day and it's like they're always growing. Sometimes they're growing in this direction or that direction. Sometimes they're kind of withering. Sometimes they're kind of flourishing. But life really is growth continuously. I mean, as long as you're alive, the cells are reproducing, replicating, dividing, new neural formations are forming, new musculoskeletal systems are being strengthened or weakened. So what I love about what you're saying is like, well, first let's establish the awareness, the consciousness, the mindfulness, and being able to observe our patterns and behaviors without judgment, without bias, without just in allowing it, observing it. So that way, if there's something that's not serving us anymore, we can start taking the steps, because we're not stagnant beings. Life is continuous growth. And so I think it's a very beautiful kind of analogy or thing to postulate, because it is giving people that it's like giving them that permission. Like, it's okay to do things differently. Like, you don't have to be stuck in this same rut constantly. And you made the very powerful point of, we so often try to, dramatically overhaul everything overnight. And that's something I found a lot, like in the functional medicine space. Most of these professionals don't really have a coaching background. They have a medical background, whereas I don't have a medical background. I have a coaching background. And so, coaching psychology 101 is, we're going to be much more successful focusing our efforts and attention on one habit or one daily promise, to fulfill that, turn that into a habit, get those new belief systems and neural networks, kind of firing, if you will, and then to, move on to that next step. But I love how the daily promises, that sounds way cooler than like, this is your habit homework for the week, right?
Well, I want to normalize, just while we're on this topic really quickly, most of us, why typically do we want to change? Some version of I'm uncomfortable to an extreme version of I'm uncomfortable. Life feels intolerable. I can't go on the way it is, right? So we want to change from discomfort, to put it simply. So I want to honor that compulsion. I have it too. It's very logical. I think this is where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble as humans, to logic our way. It does logically feel like the quickest path to feeling better, right, is those 5 new things, as opposed to, okay, Brendan and Nicole are sitting here saying one new thing for like what, 30 plus days. Well, shit, it's going to be like 5 years from now before I'm quote unquote feeling better. Well, that's not true, because just as much as we incorporate change, we gradually shift, our resting state. We gradually start to feel differently without really even noticing it. That's the byproduct of what happens. However, I just want to sympathize with everyone out there who's tried to change life from top to bottom and white knuckle it as long as we can, because I've been there too. A lot of times it does come, like I said, from incredible discomfort, and we very really just want, and sometimes we just project it on other people too. We want someone else just to get better, right? Because we can see their pathway to getting better, because we don't want to see them in pain. And all of this is very natural, as empathetic humans that I believe we all are. So I get it, though. Like I said, it does set us up to become really frustrated and disempowered. And unfortunately, many of us begin to then believe or entertain a belief of, I must be broken. Something must be wrong with me, that I cannot change this.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all so much for listening to the Holistic Savage podcast. We on the Holistic Savage team all really appreciate you and want to stay connected with you. So please rate, review, and subscribe to help the podcast grow. And if you like the podcast, help get the word out. And now, back to the show.
And I don't believe that's true for any of us, perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And the beautiful thing about just science in general and like objective evidence, the more that rolls out, it points us back to an innate intuition and wisdom that we are just so disconnected with. And so much, research, like even medical research, points back to evolution and evolutionary biology and theories. And, in some ways, I do think I'm a little bit biased because I'm young, I suppose, so I don't know what like it was for baby boomers or whatnot, but it does kind of seem like the collective emotional maturity is evolving, or it seems like we are kind of going through this evolution of evolving into these more psycho-aware, developing an emotional maturity that doesn't seem like it existed as much. I don't know. I mean, I'm just making stuff up right now, but I'd be curious how you speak to that. It kind of feels like we're evolving as a species, and because we used to think so black and white, so static of, for example, like with neurons, like you only have this many neurons. There's nothing you can do to change the way that they're firing or whatnot. It's like, the brain's actually really dynamic and it's constantly changing and rewiring, which is so revolutionary, right?
Yes. I think evolution comes through many different avenues, one of which you're speaking of now, like us just gaining more knowledge, more experience of living in these brains and having these brains studied and the effects of different things, et cetera. So there's, kind of, I think that knowledge that shifts and changes and that we get better at doing over time. And there's also, I think I heard you say the word emotional, right? There's the human, emotional, and spiritual evolution as well. And what I mean when I say that is these conditioned patterns, how we express emotionally. So one might say how mature, or immature, for lack of better wording, even though I don't love qualifiers at all, we aren't, is really impacted predominantly by that which was modeled to us, meaning the people who raised us. So I'm answering it this way because generationally, looking back even in our lineage, your personal lineage, whoever's listening, those of us who know, kind of generations beyond, you might be able to see, some of this very similar patterning, especially around emotions. And I bring up emotions in particular because as a species, especially those of us who've lived in places, bringing back Maslow, where, our actual resources for survival were threatened, where there was financial scarcity, food scarcity, where, our physical needs maybe weren't as securely being met, emotions were not really having time for those. I mean, we
Hmm.
come from generations, many of us of humans, who were living in that flight or fight or flight. So
Hmm.
when you think about child rearing, even if it's very well intentioned, like I want to be there for my kid emotionally, a lot of us again come from these lineages, these generational patterns where we just simply couldn't, where we were locked in these levels of fight or flight that didn't make emotional development possible. So to speak to your point, and it takes, single humans collectively waking up and breaking the patterns, as everyone who's listening to you and I talk today are doing for themselves and their future generations, to begin to break these patterns. And now, because again, our generation is not new to this has been happening, it's becoming more visible, and so at mass, right, more people are utilizing this. So I do think it appears, right, and in very many ways the human species is evolving. And I think some of it is, again, resources that have shifted and changed, patterns that have been broken now through generations, setting up future generations to do differently and impact then their lineage moving
Mm.
forward. So the simple answer is yes, there's a gradual evolution happening with a lot of different factors and through a lot of different contexts that I believe are freeing us up energetically to start to, kind of take on some new evolutionary tasks, if you will.
Mm. Give me the chills because that was really powerful. And yeah, I didn't even necessarily know what I was going for there, but then your answer was like, yeah, that landed. Um, so powerful because, in a sense, and I think it's helpful. Something I always like to try to remind myself is, I think a lot of times we like to zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and there's a lot of reductionism in medical practice and whatnot. Just zoom in and like, well, block this, and then something doesn't happen. But it's like I think zooming out before we zoom in can be, equally powerful or sometimes more powerful. And I love what you just said because I totally agree with that. Where I would definitely say, you know, for example, 1920s, that was like Great Depression era, right? And there was a lot of scarcity, like times were hard. Um, and so uh, I think what I'm trying to get at, I think we are now in this beautiful phase of human existence that has never happened or existed before, where like we have the opportunity to evolve in a big way. And we have the opportunity, Zach Bush talks a lot about being co-creators with Mother Nature, right? That return to symbiosis that I'm talking about, and kind of entering maybe a little esoteric, but kind of that fifth dimension of unconditional love, where like we can enter that, in some ways it's never been a more perfect time, because I think a lot of people feel like 2020 has just been this chaotic year, and it feels like the whole world's on fire, and parts of it actually are. And um, but then, I like to believe that we are kind of on that precipice of that next big awakening, that next big evolution, because we have the luxury in a sense to do the work, or because we're not in that fight or flight constantly. We live in a world of abundance, mostly, and at times things are scarce. And so I'm not saying scarcity mindset is, there's a difference between, resources are actually scarce, it's time to be afraid, it's time to go into fight or flight mode, versus that conditioning of scarcity mindset of, no, there's actually abundance all around us, but we're choosing to believe there's scarcity, which causes us that fear, that fight or flight, and then causes us to do all sorts of silly things that are probably not the definition of unconditional love. So I like to think we as a collective have this grand opportunity to come together to create a world more beautiful than any of us could have ever imagined, right?
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. And again, I'm happy you are offering this, because I also want to confirm, whatever the word would be here, that, you know, understanding that there are still things happening, right? That there are fires and very real, problematic systems in place. Though, to speak to our point, right, kind of going within and doing the work of creating the change and the peace in our moments for ourselves can happen anywhere, and happens again with the right support, through all of the avenues that we can connect with it, and then can continue to create the change outside. So I'm happy you brought that up, because it's not saying one or the other. I love the word and. I can frame that word, meaning A and D, because it's all of it. And I think that's just kind of emblematic of this entire discussion we're having, which is there's no one cause, there's no one piece, there's no one thing. That's how do we understand the whole system, and making use of acknowledging that there's space for all of it to happen at once, I think is important.
Absolutely. And so I can't help but ask, because I'm curious. I saw you did a lot of research for this book, and you're, digging into a lot of research. And so I can't help but be curious, what were some of the major things that you were, pulling research on, and what were maybe some interesting findings that are going to be things that readers will learn about in your book?
A lot of, so because I talk about the body, and the body's role in different levels, different states of dysregulation, you'll read a lot in the book around the nervous system and polyvagal theory. And I was very familiar with that. That informed my work kind of holistically for some time now, but really breaking that down and framing all of the concepts of healing and all of our stuck points around those different nervous system dysregulation states that we're stuck in, I think is going to be incredibly helpful. Our nervous system is determines a lot of our daily reactions, oftentimes outside of our awareness. So there are conscious tools and ways that we can learn and help us to kind of find that resiliency or that flexibility in our nervous system for those of us that are stuck, that I think will be really helpful. Throughout the book, it's interesting the way the book is presented. It has a narrative feel. So you'll read about my own healing journey as well as other self-healers, members of the community. We all have a narrative seeking brain. So I think storytelling and kind of understanding how these concepts fit in terms of actual people's lived experiences is really helpful. There's also, kind of worksheets and how to practically use these tools. So I say that latter piece because the way the polyvagal and our nervous system is explored in the book, on top of it being scientific and grounded, obviously, in this emerging research that's really impactful for the type of work that you and I are doing, it also breaks it down in a much more practical, understandable format. That was a really big intention of all of the book. So any science that you're going to hear presented in the book, it's applied in real life. I kind of like the practical approach. Don't get me wrong. I love to have a scientific conversation. I love me a good journal. I can understand the real science of things. I also know that collectively, a lot of us can get confused and lost and miss the point. And there's been a lot of pivotal works that I've read in my own scientific journey that have informed my work, that when you talk about, giving them to the person who wants to read about nervous system work, it doesn't translate for the practical, I think is what I'm trying to say. So I say all that to say, I made it an effort to talk scientifically, to ground, holistic healing in the new emerging data and research that we have, and to do so in a way that allows it to feel approachable. So for the listeners out there who don't, wear the scientific hat or get confused and overwhelmed by it, knowing that they can feel like they can approach some of this, what I feel is very foundationally important topics, specifically around the nervous system, in a much more applicable way.
Oh, man, that's awesome. And I love that because I think, something I've been pondering is how, I'm all for the kind of objective scientific pursuit, but then at times it's like, well, I think we can't disconnect from our intuition to just kind of blindly, do petri dish or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, it's about that context of, because it never ceases to blow my mind how much we know about the body and yet how little we understand. And what I love about, seeing the science that's coming out, there's so many brilliant researchers doing amazing things. And so it's beautiful to see kind of that gap in between, like the esoteric, the spiritual, the psychological, and, the hard science, the just black and white kind of physiology. That gap is getting narrower and narrower as like we're learning more about how all of this works. And so then it breathes a lot of life and validity to things that, like, classically, historically, were like, oh, kind of poo-pooed a little bit, right? Even though intuitively it resonates so deeply, right? So it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. Well, it's learning how, I mean, this is going to sound really silly when I think I say it. It's like a user manual for learning how to use the body. It's a difference between, okay, I read the manual. Okay, the body does this. Cool, note it, until I give myself the wisdom of connecting with my body to feel it do that, or experience it do that, or, be privy to the signs and signals it's giving you to tell you the messages. That might as well just stay in the trash, that manual, right? So it's that translation, that bridge that I think you're offering, and I think that's what is necessary. Otherwise it just remains a manual on your shelf, and we don't actually know how to be embodied, most of us humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so, I know your time is valuable. So as I start steering in a direction of letting you move on with your life, I am curious though. So, I mean, the book is obviously one huge project, one huge passion project, but then you also have your own community, the self-healers inner
Popular
circle.
circle.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'd love to hear you speak to that as far as, how does the book and your inner circle, how do they go hand in hand or differentiate, or, readers and whoever's listening, what would be the advantages of one or the other or both? How are they integrated?
For sure. So the community, like I said, is always going to be a passion project of mine,
Hmm.
always looking to expand ways that we can virtually connect to support. So right now the self-healer circle is that with our new website upgrade that I'm so excited to launch in the next month. It'll really upgrade our capacities to build the virtual connections, interpersonal connection aspects of it that we weren't able to as successfully do using Facebook and all of the other platforms that were available. So the membership, the self-healer circle membership, we really think about it is it's a library of self-healing. Each month there's a new topic, so many of which you'll see presented in the book. It's an intro to how to begin to use this topic through daily content, PDFs. How do I apply the topic of the month? So one of the months we were just talking about embodiment. We were talking about inspired action, how to be in our body when we're actioning. That was our topic. So all month, the members can experiment with utilizing that practical tool. There's also guest workshops or myself or experts from all different areas exposing people from different mindsets, different practitioners, different toolkits, exposing to different tools, and then obviously the community aspect. So the membership is really for people at any stage of their journey interested in thinking, learning about the concepts of holistic self-healing and connecting with other humans on the journey. The book, again, is the handbook, if you will. Some people just love the visual nature of books. It'll give kind of the whole comprehensive, deeper dive into the topics that we do daily in the membership. Future projects, because I have a lot in mind. I want to unveil in the next couple months a similar membership for practitioners, where practitioners who, whatever hat they wear in terms of whatever practitioner they are, can again start to be exposed to some of these more holistic modalities, different types of tools that are out there to upgrade their practices. So that's a passion project. A deeper dive into the topics will come through coursework. So probably again within the next year. So when you read the book, if you come to decide, oh, I really want to do a deep dive into inner child work, say, so it'll be very much more specific into each topic area. So you can think about it in terms of tiers, right? I want to be generally know about healing, be connected to other people doing it, be abreast of all the new information, whether I'm a practitioner or a human. Membership is right for you. I think the book is right for anyone who just kind of wants the handbook. And then the courses will allow the deeper dives into the more contextual, topical areas of interest. So that's how I formulate how all of these pieces will kind of fit together, hoping to give different learners different opportunities to learn in the way that works the best for them, so that they can really incorporate really healing into their lives, whomever you are.
Man, I think it sounds like an amazing and beautiful structure, and sounds like you're going to be busy for a while, because I was going to ask you. So it's like, okay, you just hit 3 million on social media, you're launching the book, you've got this robust community that you've built. Like, what's next? You know, what's next for Dr.
Lots
Nicole?
to
But
come. So
yeah.
much. I get so excited. This is exciting for me because it's a cool experience, and it's a shift learning how to work virtually in this new way with these bigger groups of people. How do I teach back to communication, right?
Mhm.
It's one thing for me to, kind of learn a style with me and you in this communication. Another thing to speak to varied, diverse human, right? So this has just been so learning, and I'm excited as I learn new ways of delivering this information to continue to create new projects. So hopefully you'll talk to me a decade from now and I'll still have new exciting news coming down the pipeline to share with you all.
I have a feeling you will. Yeah, it's a brave new world, and you've got, there's no shortage of work to be done. So, it's amazing that we have people like you to teach us how to do the work, because it's kind of step one, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm ever inspired by continuing to connect with people like you. I mean, you're just as much a part of my healing journey, whether you're delivering information that I, incorporate into knowledge and knowing and doing, or supporting along the way, or just knowing that there are other people out there, we feel a little less alone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy in today's world to feel very disconnected, even though we're all
Yeah.
plugged in all the time. So,
Yeah.
um, I'll let you get going as we wrap up here, but where can we get this book? I mean, I ordered mine off Amazon, probably
Yeah.
like most people do, but is there any specific place people should go, or does it matter?
So in terms of, yes, the book is on Amazon. It's also on bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, depending on the country you're located in. There are a lot of international book and publishers that will start to become available soon. All of the links that I have access to right now, all of this is fed to me through the publisher. So if I don't have it yet, it's because it might not be active, though. The majority of the links are through my Instagram account at the.holistic.psychologist. You can come over and meet all the other self-healers and see me day in and day out, talking about my own journey, and obviously releasing the self-healing tools that we have been talking about. And then in the next couple of weeks, you'll start to see me speaking about the website at yourholisticspsychologist.com. There is a website that exists now. However, it doesn't have all the new bells and whistles. And when the new website launches up on there, so I don't know when this will air, but depending on the timing of it, I have a new version of the Future Self Journal. So my journaling technique to help us create change will be up on that website, as well as some free meditations, etc. So the website is also going to be a hub for some healing tools that people might want to check out. And that's yourholisticspsychologist.com.
Amazing. I can't wait to see that website. Well, wonderful. I know I've been saying it for over a year now, but I'm just going to keep saying it till I manifest it, of like that taco date. It's going to happen. I'm going to bring my copy so you can sign it. That was supposed to happen in 2020. There were a lot of things that were supposed to happen in 2020, but really though, Nicole, I mean, I kind of wrap up my side by saying, like, it's such a pleasure and honor to know you. I mean, you've inspired me so much for a long time, and there's no words for it. It's deeper than that. So, sending you all the love in the world. I don't know, I couldn't be more inspired or blown away by everything you're doing for me, for 3 million other people. And I truly hope that, like, at the end of the day, like, you feel just this intense burning sensation of pride, because you should. So that's kind of my concluding remarks, and I'm just so thankful that you took the time to hang out with me again. It's always such a pleasure.
Thank you for saying that. I actually got some sort of feeling up in there in the chest of mine when you said that, Brendan. And I just want to reflect all of that back. I mean, I consider you a friend. It's been an honor to continue to get to know you as we are personally, professionally, and all of the things. And I just think so highly of you. I mean, I can quite literally say you've helped me heal in my body decades of imbalance in a way, and understanding, and helped me understand my body a bit more than I already did. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's my pleasure. It means the world. And I look forward to seeing, as we continue to do our work individually, and how that grows and integrates, and, how big of an impact, we can have, and how many people we can see heal. So I'm going to keep at it. I know you're going to. Until our paths cross, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. And I can't wait for this episode to release. I can't wait to get your book.
Same. Thank you too. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and everyone listening as well. Thank you for, as always, sharing your time and energy.
Oh, absolutely. All right, my friend, I'll let you go. Enjoy your day, and I'm sure we'll talk soon, my friend.
Of course.
Bye, Nicole.
Bye.